Welcome to Film Forum Presents, a podcast featuring special live events recorded at our theater located at 209 West Houston Street in downtown Manhattan. In this episode, Film Forum presents filmmaker Matt Tyrnauer, who appeared for Q&As at the opening weekend of his latest documentary, Where's My Roy Cohn?, a fascinating and incisive portrait of the nefarious political mastermind. Where's My Roy Cohn is now playing.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming to Film Forum tonight on this gorgeous evening. My name is Joseph Berger. I'm the Theater Operations and Events Manager here. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the U.S. theatrical premiere of Where's My Roy Cohn?, a new documentary by Matt Tyrnauer. Matt is a journalist. He worked as an editor-at-large and special correspondent for Vanity Fair for many years. And he's also the writer and director of numerous acclaimed documentaries, including Citizen Jane, Studio 54, and Scotty and the Secret History of Hollywood. His feature documentary debut, Valentino, the Last Emperor, premiered here at Film Forum in 2009. We're very pleased to have Matt with us tonight. He will join me for a Q&A immediately following the film, so please stick around. But before we begin, please welcome filmmaker Matt Tyrnauer.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. The film opened this weekend, and we just got the box office numbers, and we're the #1 film per screen in the United States, which is really amazing. And most of that's due to Film Forum, I think, so it's really nice. Yeah, Film Forum is a treasure, a national treasure. It's true, yeah. My first film premiered here, Valentino, the Last Emperor, in this room, and this place really means a lot to me, and the audiences are amazing. So the film, just by way of introduction, I started making this film during the election year of 2016 when I was making a previous film called Studio 54. There's some relationship between the two because Roy Cohn was the lawyer for Studio 54. It was one of the few legal fixer jobs that he bungled in his lifetime because Schrager and Rubel went to prison for tax evasion, which was what he was defending them for. But he was really the fixer guy at that time, and he was the premier fixer lawyer in New York for all those years after the McCarthy era, when he made his reputation, his hideous reputation, at the arm of Joseph McCarthy, whispering in his ear and telling him what to say. So in the 50s, Cohn invents a demagogue who's an empty vessel, and then those dots connect all the way down to today because, as most of you know, he was also the creator of Donald Trump, starting in the 70s and leading to now. So this film is very much a how we got to now narrative that is meant to wake up what Gore Vidal referred to as the United States of amnesia. That's where we live. I hate to say this name out loud in public, but I'm forced to because I want to quote something that this person said. But Anthony Scaramucci recently had a decent line, which is, it's like Roy Cohn and Joe McCarthy had a baby, and that baby ended up being Donald Trump. And I hate when someone so ridiculous and venal has a good line, but there you go. The film you're about to see probably wouldn't have been made if Hillary had won the election. And so in a way, I wish I didn't make this film because I wish that we weren't living in a Trump presidency. Because when I was watching all of that Roy Cohn footage, I was thinking to myself in the election year of 16, God, where's the Roy Cohn documentary? He's such an extraordinary subject, and he's in a lot of film because he lived a televised life from the dawn of TV in the 50s when he was in his early 20s up until his death. He was, I believe the technical term for it is media whore. And having that type of archival footage is an enormous advantage when you're cutting a film. However, when you're trying to get an indie film financed, the first question anyone asks you is, why now? So if Clinton had won, the why now question really wouldn't have been answerable. But again, woefully, the why now question was very much answerable in the wake of Trump's Electoral College victory. So we made the film in 2017. It premiered at Sundance earlier this year. Visually, I cast it as a color film noir because film noir is often about nihilism and has inexorable characters at the heart of it, and their evil doings and things going on under the surface. And that seemed very appropriate given this dark prince of a character. I think you'll be interested to know that the still photos you see in the film actually have never been seen before the movie premiered, and they are Roy Cohn's own photographs. So what happened was he died impoverished. He was living high in the hog, but he had no assets because he was a world-class tax cheat, reminding you of someone else. And all of his stuff went to auction eventually, and then more recently, all of his photos ended up in an auction house somewhere, and someone who asked not to be identified bought them at auction. He's a prominent person. I knew him, and he gave me the photos. So all of the photos you see here that are privately Roy and Cohn in private surroundings, especially on boats and yachts and around swimming pools with shirtless young men, are his own photos that I know he would not have wanted you to see, which is why I'm so delighted to show them to you today. Thank you for being here, and enjoy the show.
Let's jump right into the questions from the audience. If you have a question, raise your hand. We've got 2 ushers with mics.
I loved Valentino, and I heard you speak at that film, and it was great. So, did you try to get Trump to speak on camera?
Yes, unfortunately, at the end of these credits, which sadly we can't roll here because of constraint, you're going to see behind me that 3 attempts were made, and he never responded to any of them, so we did try. I thought actually he might enjoy it because he doesn't enjoy seemingly enjoy being president in a real sense, so I thought this might be fun for him in his mind. I think it actually might be like watching porn for him if he actually watched the movie. I fear that might be his response because, like Roger Stone, Roy Cohn's the hero, and that's a very dark and upside-down mindset, but I do believe it's the case.
I think I'm one of the youngest people in this audience, and I'm not that young. I'm 39, but there were a lot of little historical tidbits that, as far as I'm concerned, you unearthed, like Cohn's role in getting Reagan to apparently win the electoral college votes necessary to go on to the presidency in New York because of some arcane ability for the Liberal Party, which no longer seems to be a big force, to split the votes and stuff like this. The role that he played in the Eagleton or Eagleburger being deposed, Eagleton being deposed, which I vaguely remember from Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail.
Right.
Geraldine Ferraro and her husband's baggage.
Right.
And the question is, when our media was unable to unearth these tidbits, recall these tidbits, and attach them to Trump to possibly prevent him from gaining the presidency, as a documentary filmmaker, is your film going to be a footnote to history, or do you have an impetus to bring a more documentary sensibility into the mainstream of American media?
Well, at the beginning, I referred to this as the United States of Amnesia, which is a quote from Gore Vidal. This is the problem with our country. It's systemic, it's structural, but we all have to do our part. So, of course, the education system is very broken. We're not taught history. If you look at the way the Army McCarthy hearings are presented here in a relatively few moments, I would bet, because most people, based on the feedback I'm getting, didn't realize that that was the way they went down. And Roy Cohn is right there at the center of them in this reality television passion play that changed our politics forever and kind of redefined smear politics and big lie politics. And here we are again in this sort of rhyming historical moment with Trump. So the movie is meant to live within that context. That we have a full house here tonight, no matter what anyone's age is a really, really positive sign, actually. So that, I think, is good indication. I've said this in the Valentino run here, which was kind of epic. Word of mouth is really important with documentaries. So do tell your friends. We just don't know these basic facts of history, and to have them all put together, just laid out in front of you in one place, I think is very helpful, because we're drinking from a fire hose of cable news. And even though we might watch our 4 to 5 hours of MSNBC a night, God help us, it does give you a certain marination in the information, but to actually have a step back moment where you sit in a space that's public, which I think is very important, and where you can converse with the person next to you and have a reckoning with history is the key.
Most of us obviously are baffled by Donald Trump's attraction. What was Roy Cohn's attraction? The Barbara Walters of the world, the people. When you went through your archives and this crowd of people that many people respect, and they are in his world, what was the attraction? Power. I mean, what's not obvious?
Well, power and money usually is pretty sexy to people. But New York, here we are in the middle of Manhattan, the most transactional city, built on mercantilism, and thus it's ever been. It is extraordinary, and there is a puzzle in there that I'm also a footnote to this film and all the films I do. I don't really like to tell audiences exactly what to think, so I leave some ambiguity and it's sometimes oblique storytelling, so you can draw your own conclusions. And there are a lot of moments here that stitch together, and you can kind of like do the final neat stitching on it. But here's Roy Cohn in the wake of Army McCarthy. Joseph McCarthy is destroyed by it. He should have been destroyed by it and was for about 2 days. He comes back to New York. His father throws a party for him at the Waldorf Astoria, and then he's off to the races. And David K. Johnson in the film refers to New York in mid-century as Candyland to him. And that money, society, media industrial complex embraces him, and he becomes sort of like the mayor of it. And people say to me, how did New York society do that? And my answer is, have you met New York society?
I also read, though, that he was, in fact, quite charming and fun and funny to be around, which probably helped in his pursuit to surround himself with these.
He could be funny. He could be very gossipy. Gossip makes the wheels go around here. And like someone else, whom I interviewed when I was a 22-year-old reporter at Vanity Fair at Mar-a-Lago before he had the money to redecorate it or even have air conditioning, he was charming. Narcissists tend to be charming. It's one of their tools in their dark toolkit.
I just want to say you're a fantastic filmmaker. I've seen all your films, including Valentino.
Thank you.
I have 2 questions. Roger Stone, a psychopath, comes across in this film as so measured and calm and intelligent. How did you sit in the same room with this man? The second thing is there any possibility, of course, down the road, perhaps just before the election, that this film could be shown on CNN, because people need to see this?
Well, it has a long life, and the better it does theatrically, the more long life it will have, and we hope that everyone will see it. And there are many ways to see documentaries now, so we look forward to that. The Roger Stone day was extraordinary. I woke up on the wrong side of the bed for every reason that you just stated. I was thinking, this is a prevaricator, he's a liar, he's a dirty trickster, he's a self-promoter. Marie Brenner, my Vanity Fair colleague, who's a producer on the film, and she's here tonight. Big round of applause. Marie Brenner and Corey Reeser, my producing partner, also here, had been in touch with Roger for a piece she did. He came, he showed up. I walked in. We shot this actually in Marie's living room, that scene. And Marie was texting me saying, do you think he's going to drop a bug? Do you think Putin's going to be listening in on my household affairs? And I was like, oh, God, I think you might be right about that. Anyway, he was utterly charming. And I think that he really admired Cohn, and it was actually fun and almost edifying for his own deranged mind to have this trip down memory lane. And he seems coherent because it's a subject he actually knew something about. And he was talking about his hero. Now, that's all very screwed up, but it was the fact. And when we watched the dailies, it was like everything he said actually tracked and was almost usable for them in the film, and he's in it quite a lot. A creature like Stone really lives or thrives on media attention. So you can't expect them to come in, reeking of sulfur and trying to attack you. The thing's not going to go well if they're doing that. So they know what they're doing. And Cohn was very similar. I mean, you can see he has a kind of perverse charm in the interviews that he's conducting. Sometimes you have to interview the devil if you want to have the full picture.
I just heard someone whisper here that rather than CNN, the film should be shown on Fox.
That would be my dream, weirdly, to say.
Thank you so much for this film. Speaking of cable news, I wonder if you could speak a little more about the relationship between Rupert Murdoch and Roy Cohn. I mean, those two, it's hard to think of two figures who are more responsible for our politics today, and to see them in the Oval Office together.
Well, part of the point of this film and the mission of this film and the last act of this film is to show you the connection and to reveal, and it's really unknown. So we have the photographic evidence of a key meeting in the Reagan White House that leads literally to Fox News. It's Roy Cohn brokering a appeal to the Reagan administration to end the FCC law, which prevented newspaper owners from owning TV stations in the same market. It was a very reasonable law, which was one of the protections that were really the kind of status quo in this country for the century when we really made the most progress. And that was eroded when Reagan ended it. And it was at the behest of Cohn. You see him literally as the puppet master between these two guys. And it's just no surprise that who was there, and that Reagan, who I think is a precursor to Trump, it makes total sense in hindsight that the end of the 20th century, the century of movies and media, we would elect an actor as president. We didn't think it was possible, if you remember before. Everyone used to say, my father wrote TV Westerns, by the way, and all of his friends were saying, Ronnie Reagan will never win. We turned him down for A Part in Gunsmoke, don't you remember? That was the attitude. And then Barack Obama himself and Bernie Sanders himself assured us, Donald Trump will never be president. I took great solace in that. It makes complete sense in hindsight that in the age of the Kardashians, may it end soon, that Donald Trump, a reality television star, is elected president in 20 years into the 21st century. Rupert Murdoch has a great deal to do with this. Cohn empowered him. I hate to tell you, at a certain level, power is very interconnected, and as is stated in the film, absolute power corrupts absolutely. We are living in the world of a modern Machiavelli, who's Roy Cohn, who's come back from beyond the grave to really rule our lives. We have to get out from under this moment. I hope this film weaponizes people who are really minded and committed to going into the streets and telling their friends, because that really is the social capital we need to end this very dark moment.
Who, if anybody other than Mr. Trump, would not speak with you?
Yes, well, there were several people I did want to speak to, and for various reasons they couldn't. So chief among them was Barbara Walters. I wanted to ask her, WTF was that all about? And she's not been well, apparently, for the past couple of years when we were shooting the film. I sent 3 emissaries who know her with notes, and she declined each time. She hasn't really been in public for a couple of years. Robert Morgenthau just died at 102, I believe. And I sent emissaries as well. I have mutual friends who know him and his wife, who's a journalist. And I heard last night from Patricia Bosworth, who's a biographer and knows Lucinda Franks, the wife of Morgenthau, that Lucinda was really asking him to do it, and he refused. The thought was Cohen slipped away from him 3 times, and he didn't want to dwell on it. I think it would have been great if he had spoken for the historical record. There's no shame in it at all. And I mean, to be 102 and still have your marbles is so impressive. But he did die quite recently. So those were 2 examples, and you can't get everyone, but we got a lot of people, and I think members of the family, I think, were particularly evocative.
In your trailer, you have at the very end, it says, and I Picked the Presidents by Roy Cohn, after the credits in the trailer. And I'm wondering, what do you think that Roy Cohn learned from J. Edgar Hoover?
He was a student of Hoover's. In the way that Trump was his apprentice, he was very much an apprentice to Hoover, and that all tracks and makes sense, because this is sort of the the dark underbelly of hypocrisy and demagoguery in this country that Cohn exemplifies, Hoover exemplifies, and that legacy feeds into the current political crisis, which is, again, why the film was made. It's very interesting to see this legacy, though, because Hoover handpicks Cohn, who's a junior assistant in the Justice Department at the age of 22 or 23 after the Rosenberg trial, and he places him with McCarthy. And that brings about that kind of dark symbiosis of those two, brings about the darkest period in modern American history, except for now. And it's all connected, which is why we need the film. It's why I made the film. It's also worth noting that Hoover and Cohn were both gay and not open about it, and not only not open about it, were hypocrites worthy of Dante's Eighth Circle of Hell, because they were persecuting gay people while they were hiding their true identity. So this is obviously one of the most shameful passages, in addition to the witch hunting of the communist period. I think we all thought this was behind us. Obviously, it's not. And if in the United States of amnesia, if we're not aware or awake enough, then the unthinkable can happen. And the unthinkable already has happened, but what even more unthinkable could happen is the question.
I was curious as to whether you considered speaking with the Rosenberg's two orphan sons. They were adopted, obviously, the Mirapoles, I think.
Yeah, I didn't. I wanted to cover the Rosenberg period in the first act of the film in the way I did. We had this extraordinary color footage of riots in the streets of New York and people really taking to extreme examples of activism, which I was very inspired by. You see how upset people were and how vocal they were, which I think should inspire us all right now. Where are the people taking to the streets now? We should ask ourselves. If I had been doing more of a Rosenberg-centric film, which would be a very valid thing to do, I would have done that. But I wanted to have a 90-minute film that was a sweeping political indictment, and that became a part of the first act.
Who would you say is the new Roy Cohn, or the new Roy Cohn explorer?
Who is the new Roy Cohn? This has been asked a lot. I was on MSNBC on another show yesterday, and they asked me that. And my answer was, I think Donald Trump is his own Roy Cohn, really. Maureen Dowd wrote a column about today. There have been 2 columns about the film, 3 really, in the New York Times. Michelle Goldberg also wrote a column, all pointing to this. Basically, what we have is a president who's a combination of Roy Cohn, Nixon, and Fat Tony Salerno all combined. All those 3 people would be bad enough, but he is in the Oval Office and has the nuclear button. It's a truly terrifying thing. I think this movie has been described as a horror movie. I wouldn't disown that description. It's very intentionally designed to have the aesthetic of a film noir film, which has a sort of creeping evil underneath the surface in that genre. So that's definitely the mood of the film. I was asked, Maureen Dowd asked me in the New York Times, in this kind of Q&A she does at the end of her articles, is Bill Barr the new Roy Cohn? And my response was, he wishes.
I can't pronounce him well, but Scaramucci said that, hark alert, Trump will turn on you no matter who you are. But doesn't that contrast with what you said in the movie, or what was said in the movie about Cohen being loyal to his folks? Is that a difference in the 2 people?
Cohn said at the end of his life, when Trump was moving away from him, when he was a sick man, Donald pisses ice water. It's quite an indictment from the devil, isn't it? So, yes, Cohn was loyal. The back-scratching power grid of money, politics, and society in New York City has certain codes of loyalty. The mafia has a code of loyalty, too. It's called omerta, all right? So bad guys can have oaths of loyalty. It's not unusual. And I suppose that since Trump, being a borderline narcissist of maybe heretofore unknown dimensions, doesn't have his own version of omerta, even though he behaves like a mafia boss. So he's not even a good mafioso. It's like he's failing at that.
I want to ask if you think about when you're embarking on these films, do you think about the visual? Do you think of the final visual product and how that adds to the narrative? Certainly, you had the water element, and also just like the other question: when we're seeing this happen in New York in the 70s, and like the mafia and everything is so overt and it's happening, and you have figures that are so flamboyant about him, like obviously Roy, and we have things that are happening today in New York that the corruption is still happening, but it's much more ingrained in society, and like we have Tammany Hall like stuff happening, but in a very different way. Which one do you think is more dangerous? People like Roy Cohn, or the people who are actually furthering gentrification here in New York without us knowing?
That's sweeping. But it's interesting. I made a movie about gentrification, actually. So you're on point. I made a movie called Citizen Jane, which is about Robert Moses and Jane Jacobs. So it addressed what led to aspects of gentrification. But that's a movie about power. You know, there are a lot of problems that are structural in society. I think that there's a current political crisis that is national, international now, that has taken us by surprise. I don't think we saw this coming. I think if we were in an Obama administration still, or if a normal politician were president, whether you agreed with them or not, and they were working within the structures of the Democratic Republic that we all thought we were living in, then we could look at other structural problems that need a lot of attention, and you know what's happening in our cities, what's happening in a local political level, what's happening, and all of those types of political traumas and local problems we have. But now I think, and the reason I wanted to make the film is, we need to step back and I think reassess. The guardrails of democracy are a lot weaker than they thought they were. So I think putting an eye on the real basic pillars of the society, making sure that when we have an election that the votes are actually counted, for instance, actually following the rule of law when people commit perjury or don't respond to congressional indictments. As an example, there were, I think a congressman was on TV today saying he believes that the people that have been dodging their testimony should be put in the Capitol's prison. And he pointed out, and something I didn't know, which was the Capitol, the Congress, actually has a prison. Corey Lewandowski should be in that congressional prison. Like, why isn't he? And there's a sort of somnambulance that is happening, and again, the film is a wake-up call to that. The second part of the question was about the style of the film. I do figure out what I want the film to look like before I start shooting it. So I light the interviews in a certain way if they're sit-down interviews. If it's verite shooting, I hire a DP that I know will give me certain something. Sometimes I use no lights. In the film Valentino, The Last Emperor, I didn't use a single light or a single tripod in the whole film. So it's a stylistic decision. I wanted this film to have a kind of color film noir palette to it. So we shot, for instance, the reel-to-reel tape recorder. I've often wondered before making films like this, like when you see the tape recorder, like where does that come from? And I went vintage tape recorder shopping, and I bought a couple. They're like $4.95 if you want a tape recorder from the 70s or 60s. I've picked my favorite one, and then we lit it, and we had to make sure it worked first, and then we lit it and we shot it for a day. And that adds a mood to the film. So all of that is very, very purposeful. And there should be very few accidents in a film that you've worked on hard. And another weird footnote to this is, so I'm a big film noir fan. I love the films of Robert Aldrich. And he did Kiss Me Deadly, which is one of the greatest film noirs. We also did color film noir much later when Hollywood didn't want to shoot black and white anymore. So I chose the palette similar to that. And I chose a weird other palette and kind of look, which is the TV series Columbo. And the reason I did that was the DPs on Columbo were the old Hollywood film noir DPs who couldn't get work anymore. And they were all on Universal used them. That's where Columbo was made. And they were just throwing those episodes to these guys. And they're really well lit, actually. There's this kind of incredible color film noir to it. We took screen grabs from Columbo, and that was the specific look of it. And another footnote is that my father was the writer of Columbo, at least a lot of it. So a tribute. Anyway, we're selling out theaters. Word of mouth in indie film is everything. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Film Forum Presents. Special thanks to Sony Pictures Classics for making this event possible. If you like what you just heard, please be sure to subscribe to get future episodes and rate and review so that more movie lovers can find us. Film Forum is an independent nonprofit cinema, and our doors have been kept open for nearly 50 years thanks to the invaluable support of our members and donors. Please visit www.filmforum.org for details on membership, as well as information and showtimes for our current programming. See you at the movies.